this time, so I think that we'll actually. Oh, there are more. I'll let more coming in as well before we but yeah. Now let's see. People are a couple of minutes late, but that's fine. We'll probably have the time, so it won't be that much of an issue that if we are a couple of minutes late for the.
Hello, Gunnar. Celia here. Sorry, I'm in my car. I'm listening to you. I'll be on my screen in 10 minutes. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. You're most welcome, Celia. Nice to have you here aboard.
Yeah. Thank you, Gunnar. Is Laura here?
Yes.
I cannot see her.
Yeah, but Laura's here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
I'm here. Hi,
hey,
Celia.
Laura. So nice to hear you. So I'll be on my screen in 10 minutes. Okay? I'll listen to you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye. Yeah. Okay, then I think that we actually start up. There are no more entries at this time, as I could see. Please welcome all to this 22nd STARS talk. As a STARS EU, the alliance, we have had 21, I should say, because this is the 22nd talks when both that the thematic interest group has presented themselves, but also we have externals, or we have some staff members from the different partner universities, but not least from the thematic interest groups, the TIGs in the STARS EU, has presented interesting topics which shows the knowledge, the width and the competence within the alliance, and these talks are a way to inform both us internally but also externals on the knowledge that we have and what we work on, what we know about, and what we could collaborate around. So they are an important thing, part of the sharing of the research knowledge and the competence in the alliance, and so we could find matches, we could find mutual interest, and so on. This talk, the 22nd, will be given by Laura Casanova Martín, perhaps better to pronounce it, from University of La Laguna in Spain, over the topic of anti-discrimination law and work, addressing complex and systemic inequalities. Laura is part of the thematic interest group of inclusion and social justice, and when it comes to these talks, they are recorded. I hope everybody agrees upon that these are recorded, because we want to be able to display them later on for those that are not able to join in when they are given. So they will be given by the YouTube channel for the Alliance and through the website of the STARS EU Alliance. If you do not agree upon that you could be viewed or your voice could be heard, then I'm afraid I need to ask you to leave. But I hope everybody agrees upon that you are recorded and be part of this webinar, which I think will be very, very interesting to hear about the take from Laura on this issue. But before we begin, I would like to promote very shortly about a blended intensive program, which is given by another partner university, Hanse, University of Applied Science in Groningen in the Netherlands. They have a blended intensive program on inclusion, social justice, and global mindset in higher education curriculum. The information about this BIP is on the website for starseu.org, and you need to apply before mid-February if you want to participate in this blended intensive program. I think it would be it is really interesting, so please go in and look at it through the website, and if you are able to attend, please join in and apply. which you could do through the information is given on the website. So please look at this as well. And by that, I would like to, besides welcome you all participants, I would say that not least our presenter today, Laura Casanova Martín. I won't give you any real introduction. I would say that please introduce yourself, the topic we have already mentioned, and you have 30 to up to 40 minutes, and afterwards we will be able to have some dialogue, questions, and so on with the audience. Please, Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gunnar, and for the presentation, for the introduction. And it is a huge honor for me and a pleasure to be here with all of you and to share this time together. As it has been said, yes, I am at the University of La Laguna. I am a researcher on social security and labor law. That is my main field of study, but specifically I focus a lot on equality and non-discrimination in the workplace. And that is why I chose this topic to share with you all today. So we could talk about the limitations and the challenges that anti-discrimination law is currently facing. I will try to share my screen, letting you all know that I cannot see you. So hopefully, Gunnar, if there's any question at all, please let me know. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen. Just enter presentation mode, and then you're fine.
Okay, so this is a topic of, well, the title of my presentation today, Anti-discrimination law and work, addressing complex and systemic inequalities. It is a very innovative title because I wanted to show that it is not an easy task nowadays to try to promote equality within the workplace. So unfortunately, my talk today won't be offering a lot of solutions or answers. Rather, it will be posing new questions, trying to push dialogue with all of you to see what we think, how we can try and come up with new ways to deal with these complex and systemic inequalities that historically have been persisting in general in our societies, but in particular in the labor market with a lot of intensity. And so that is my main objective, to try to pose new questions, to try to come up with new solutions together, and to discuss whether or not the current norms are able to address these problems, these complex problems, and how. And so I will jump right in because I don't want to take up a lot of time, so we have enough time afterwards to talk and discuss. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the global context that we are in right now. As we know, the last years, we've had a lot of new regulations regarding equality and non-discrimination in the workplace, especially within the European Union framework. And still, this is the latest report published by the International Labour Organization. And the report was published with this title: Global Progress and Social Justice Slowed by Persistent Inequalities. So this should give us a hint that even though we have a lot of new regulations, that we have a very active judiciaries in all of our member states, and also the European Court of Justice is very active in this matter, still we have persistent inequalities that impact on the daily lives of workers and their families. And I chose this report, even though it's more from a global perspective and not so much a European perspective, because the work of the International Labour Organization is leading in this aspect. The International Labour Organization has historically talked about or placed social justice in the center of international labor law regulations. And in this way, it has also influenced the advances that have been taking place within the European Union framework. So I believe that in these changing times that we have to keep in mind the transformations that are taking place everywhere in every country and regionally as well. We have to keep in mind this common vision regarding social justice and decent work. And this should be the starting point to start the conversation around equality and non-discrimination in general, but specifically in the workplace. So with this in mind, as I said before, the International Labour Organization has historically established 4 pillars around from which the social justice should be promoted. The first one is fundamental human rights. We all know that equality and non-discrimination is precisely one of those core labor rights. The second one is equal access to opportunities, because we know that it is not enough to have a formal framework. We have to help and address social and structural inequalities as well to guarantee that every worker has the same opportunities to access the labor market and to promote within the labor market. And then we also need to keep in mind the fair distribution of resources, because we know that work is an essential pillar of our lives, everyone's life. It establishes your level of resources to access to access housing, to access education, and to live with dignity, workers and their families. So we need to be conscious and try to guarantee this fair distribution of resources, keeping in mind that work is central to all of it. And the last point is fair transitions that I have already mentioned, which I just want to say that fair transitions imply that we have to deal with the transformation that we have currently going on in our labor market, but not only trying to be careful on the effects, the effects they might have on specific group of workers, but because these changes can also aggravate old inequalities, and they can make it more difficult for us to tackle them and to try to promote real equality. So this is the general vision that the International Labour Organization is promoting regarding social justice and just transitions, and I think should be the baseline from which to address these more general conceptual topics. What is the International Labour Organization telling us about the current situation? Well, that 70% of a person's earnings are still determined by circumstances such as country and sex, something that we might think that has been long left behind, but still it's an important issue affecting workers all over the world. Informality has fallen only by 2%, and is still affecting a lot of workers on the different countries. This, of course, must be taken into account regarding specific sectors of activities, like for example, care work, but still it's a huge challenge for social justice, because those workers that are working in informal conditions do not have the protections and guarantees that labor law establishes. Then if we focus particularly on gender discrimination and gender gaps in the labor market, we can see that even though we've had a lot of new regulations, the gender gaps in the labor market persist significantly. And this is very concerning, especially regarding to the gender pay gap, because as I said before, the work is central to our lives, and economic resources determine the level of wellness. And so we need to have not only good pay, but enough pay to live a good life. And so all of these issues present important challenges for social justice, and they should be kept in mind. As I said before, informality is one of the issues that makes us worry about the state of social justice and equality, because it does not allow workers to benefit from the guarantees and labor rights initially established by labor law. And this was one of these historical functions of labor law, to protect workers and to guarantee their labor rights and fair conditions, and at the same time to establish collective spaces and ways to negotiate and collective bargaining mechanisms to guarantee that workers have representation and that they can fight, negotiate, and establish their own working conditions. And in all of this historical process, the principle of equality and the prohibition of discrimination have always been core values. And nevertheless, the prohibition of discrimination, the principle of non-discrimination, is recognized as a human right, a fundamental right, and specifically within the workplace as well. So with all of this in mind, we have important challenges right now in the workplace, but we have to take a moment and think about what are we trying to achieve? What form of equality? What is the objective? What do we picture in the future when we talk about social justice and equality? Is it the same? These are important questions, and we don't have a precise definition. We never have had precise definitions. And as the context continuously evolves and it makes these situations, these inequalities turn more and more subtle and more complex, it is important to talk about concepts, and it is important to discuss and expressively say what concepts we are talking about and if we agree on the core values that we are working towards. And equality is one of these big concepts that everyone knows, but no one really knows what it means depending on the context and the legal field. In general, we think, when we think from we adopt a legal perspective, we think of equality in a formal way, meaning equal treatment, meaning equal access to the law, to the judiciary. But we've long realized that reducing equality to equal treatment, treating everyone the same, and treating those alike the same, and those who are not alike differently, is not enough. We need to go one step further. And that's how we've progressively started talking about other definitions, other concepts of equality that have a more substantive or material dimension. However, frequently these concepts have been focused on other fields, not precisely law, other fields like public policy and so on. But I think it is important to keep in mind that law must have an objective, a final objective. Law shows us how reality should be. And so it establishes certain guarantees to help us move closer to that objective. And in that way, we've had new proposals, new concepts, trying to define equality in this broader sense. The one I propose to you here today is the one developed by Sandra Fredman, And she's been working on this for a very long time, and she has reached the conclusion that equality is not a simple concept, but it's multidimensional. And this means that within equality, we need to recognize a redistributive dimension, which is focused on reducing disadvantage, and in both in a material sense and in a symbolic or regarding power structures as well. We have to pay attention to the recognition dimension, which is probably the most challenging right now, meaning that we need to reduce stigma, stereotyping, prejudice, and violence in general. The participative dimension, which is very relevant within the world of work because it tries to facilitate participation, social inclusion, and political voice. And as we know, collective bargaining and social dialogue within labor-industrial relations are essential. And the last dimension, the transformative dimension, which aspires to accommodate difference and structural change. This last dimension is probably what we all have in mind when we picture this future equality, to accommodate difference, that the difference is celebrated, and that no one is treated in a worse way because of their differences. And so this would be the broader concept of equality, the objective we are working towards. So then, what is discrimination? What kind of discrimination? What concept of discrimination are we managing? Do we have an idea? Will we have a precise definition of what discrimination is? Well, the answer is no, at least at this point. It is another concept that it has been developed bit by bit, but not through the different forms that it can manifest, and not really. There's no definitions of what the notion of or the nature of discrimination is. But this is very relevant because in the end, when we try to eliminate discrimination, we have to know how it works in order to have effective mechanisms and guarantees to achieve this objective, this equality objective. And so if we pay attention to the definitions that we have in our European framework, these are the definitions that we can find in the anti-discrimination directives. I didn't state them, but it's more or less the same text. And even though discrimination per se is not defined, we do find the definitions of direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, and other forms that are also included in what is understood to be discrimination, such as harassment, instructions to discriminate against, and recently other forms, new forms such as intersectional discrimination and discrimination by association. But what I wanted to highlight here is that the first definition that we see, direct discrimination, where one person is treated less favorably on grounds of sex than another, has been or would be treated in a comparable situation. What we see here is a very specific perspective on the prohibition of discrimination based mostly on the comparison, and this could make it a little bit easier to go to the judge, but it doesn't really reflect the nature of discrimination. Even though we then have some different definitions that try to work in the same line as this broader notion of equality, trying to pay attention to the context and the structures that make these inequalities persist. The core concept, the core definition of discrimination is, as we can see, formal, individualistic, centered on the comparison between two people, And so this, from the first moment, this presents an important challenge when we try to tackle broader concepts of discrimination, taking into account the social context. And so these elements, the inability to consider the social context where these treatments take place, is one of the huge challenges that we have right now within anti-discrimination law in the workplace. And that is why we've had other proposals of around the concept of discrimination that try to highlight these particular elements within the that try to describe precisely what discrimination per se is. It's not just an unjustified difference in treatment. There must be something else. Why? Because, as I said before, the prohibition of discrimination is a non-discrimination principle, is a fundamental right. So there must be another element that justifies that the discrimination could affect our human dignity. That's the reason why it has been construed as a fundamental right. And so we have to go a little bit deeper. Of course, there is an unjustified difference in treatment. There's a different treatment there, but there must be something else, a pejorative aspect. A pejorative aspect meaning that there's some disadvantage, there's a consequence associated with that difference in treatment. But there must be something else because, as I said before, it is so important that it aggravates human dignity. So what else should we keep in mind? Well, this difference in treatment places a particular group in a disadvantaged and inferior position. We have asymmetry of power. We have a structural system, a structure that places some groups in one position and other groups in another one. And so that asymmetry is precisely what is at the core of the concept of discrimination. So following this reasoning, this dynamic works in a structural or systemic manner rather than incidentally, which means that we need to take in mind what the social context, the specific context is when trying to tackle specific cases of discrimination. This means that we have to focus on the different treatment, of course, but we have to contextualize and place it in a broader context to understand the relevance of that difference in treatment and identify the pejorative aspect that is in play. So, from what I've said up to now, you see this the presentation was focused on concepts, on posing questions to see what the limitations of the current regulations are. We know that equality is not to achieve equality is not an easy task. It's a multidimensional objective, and we know that the prohibition of discrimination it's necessary, but that it must go one step ahead, one step more. We must evolve and work on that definition to try and highlight the importance of this social dimension in order to really tackle systemic inequalities. So how could we really advance on this difficult task? Well, as I said on several occasions, we've had a lot of new regulations over the past years. Historically, the prohibition of discrimination was one of the main mechanisms within anti-discrimination law, always keeping in mind that it aims to sanction and eliminate unjustified and harmful differences in treatment that systematically and structurally place a particular group in an inferior position, as I was saying before. So the prohibition of discrimination is fundamental to achieve equality, but it's only one way to do so. Okay, so it has a protective and a restorative purpose because it is focused on eliminating these unjustified and harmful behaviors, and to restore the victims of this harm they've received. But then, with this broader notion of equality, we need to have other ways to also tackle these structural inequalities. And we can identify two mechanisms: measures of equality of opportunity and measures of equality of outcomes, that shouldn't really, they should all be perceived as complementary to the prohibition of discrimination, but they are different mechanisms. Measures of equality of opportunity, they seek to ensure equal access to the labor market, equal working conditions, and equal enjoyment of rights. So we have a promotional and preventive purpose in line with what I was saying at the beginning of this fair distribution of resources and guaranteeing equal access to jobs and promotions within the labor market. And then we have measures of equality of outcomes, which often but not exclusively consist of positive action measures. These are widely known, and they are intended to compensate significant material inequalities, past inequalities, and I think this is important to keep in mind. So they have a compensatory temporal purpose, meaning that since they are focused on addressing these past inequalities, once these effects are eliminated, then these measures should all be eliminated as well. So since we've had a lot of new regulations that develop these type of measures at the same time, sometimes it's difficult to understand that we need to understand they are complementary, but they are different. And so I thought it important to highlight their main characteristics here. So one way to try to address the root causes of labor discrimination, keeping in mind the systemic and structural nature, is precisely to focus not only on developing the concepts regarding the prohibition of discrimination and have specific guarantees that allow workers to access justice, but to also develop accurate and specific measures of equality of opportunity that at the same time can contribute to have people in general to have equal opportunities to access the labor market, exercise their labor rights, and at the same time, add some measures of equality of outcomes that try to compensate those past inequalities. We need to keep in mind that which measures and how we design these measures will always depend on the specific country, territory, or region that we are, because we need to keep in mind that the context and the historical context and traditions are different, which means that it depends on where you are. There are some inequalities that have historically had more relevance than others. Of course, if we pay attention to global reports, we see that sex and gender is one of the most common grounds for discrimination. So it would be safe to say that gender equality measures are always needed. But at the same time, there might be specific patterns that exist in different regions that would mean the need to study beforehand, before implementing these measures, what are the specific characteristics of this context of inequalities. And to do so, to study and to identify which factors and mechanisms are the one perpetuating these deep inequalities, we need to have a method, a valid method that allows us, or the competent specialized organs or authorities, to develop these studies, to pay attention to the social context. We have traditionally, historically, we've had different methods, and the ones that are more widely known are the gender perspective, and lately intersectionality as well, because these are ways of understanding our reality that allow us to take into account gender-based differences, and to identify gender differences in status and power. As I said before, discrimination is not only about different treatment, but about power asymmetries. And so method is important in this sense because it would allow us to first understand how these inequalities work, and then define and evaluate the level on which these measures are working. And then if we add another further step, intersectionality allows us to not only try to pay attention to gender differences, but also try to see those intersections, those places where not only one ground for discrimination is relevant, but more than one. Those places where inequalities work in a more complex way, and that requires us to pay attention on the way that power works, to see the direction in which the power works, and to try to identify those groups that are in a most vulnerable situation. In this case, gender and intersectional perspective, for example, when focused on the labor market, would allow us to identify those sectors of activity where we have historically groups of workers historically unseen, such as domestic workers, for example, is an easy example that helps us show the relevance and the specificity that we can identify when sex and gender works together with another ground for discrimination, which in this case could be race and migration status. So the method and gender perspective, intersectionality, we can develop, and we should also develop more general methods that would allow us to study for different types of, for the different grounds for discrimination. But they should work in a cross-cutter manner, always present to try to identify previously this social context, but also when we design, evaluate, and implement the different measures for equality that I was talking about before. And also, they should also be used by legal practitioners in every sector in a truly transversal manner. And in this sense, I've tried to show the complexity that anti-discrimination law faces nowadays, because we have important conceptual limitations. We have diverse and numerous regulations that try to address and eradicate discrimination from different perspectives. And we also have many and different actors involved or that they should be involved in the fight against discrimination. And we need to recognize this plurality of actors, especially when we are talking from the labor from a labor perspective, because we need to keep in mind that governments and public actors do not have the same obligations as private actors, as employers. Governments have a broader obligation to promote equality and prevent discrimination, while employers, they have a legal obligation, of course, not to discriminate, a negative obligation, but they cannot be asked to develop the same measures and to be involved at the same level as public organizations, as governments and public agencies. So this is the starting point, but the latest norms that have been approved have been trying to involve and actively involve employers as well in this task to promote inequality and to prevent discrimination. So this important distinction that I was telling you about has been recently turned even more complex, and we need to keep that in mind and realize that the objective of these latest reforms is to involve everyone, to actively involve everyone, meaning that the governments and the legislators, they have to define new norms to adapt the concept, adapt the legal mechanisms to these changing times, but that trade unions and business associations have also the obligation to get actively involved and to incorporate equality and non-discrimination alongside the processes of bargaining and social dialogue, and that they should exercise the principle of solidarity as well, and adopt a more active involvement, not only within their express competencies, but also in a broader sense and social sense. Of course, workers need to be involved. They need to know what their rights are. They need to be able to access this information in order to really contribute to knowing what the reality is, but also to design appropriate measures to deal with the current inequalities. And then we have equality bodies that they have a different level. Depending on the countries, they have different positions. Of course, the European Union is working ahead to reinforce the duties of equality bodies. And of course, this would mean that they would also be required to act or to have a more active involvement regarding the promotion and the promotion of equality and prevention of discrimination, and not only helping victims or developing statistics. And so they would also have to go a step further. Of course, the judiciary, we need to have training. We need specific training. We don't have it right now, or we have very little of it. And if we have, we really want to face the conceptual limitations that I was telling you about before, we need to have training, specific training to every law practitioner we have, including the judiciary. And so all of these strategies should include the principle of solidarity, which I think nowadays is even more important to consider. Of course, the active involvement I was telling you about, and the cooperation between all of these actors to really define measures that try to actively tackle discrimination and establish spaces and mechanisms to negotiate and contribute to the definition of these measures, and the conceptual discussions that need to take place to effectively adapt the current regulation to the changing context we are in right now. So I understand I've been talking a lot about concepts. Maybe this was not the presentation a lot of you expected to hear today, but the truth is that we cannot keep rushing forward. We need to stop and talk about core issues, concepts and categories that have been in place for a very long time. And then sometimes we can adapt to our social reality, and sometimes we cannot do that because they don't work anymore. But in order to really try to have a coherent and effective anti-discrimination framework, we need to ask these questions, and we need to have these spaces to get to know these specificities that we have in our countries, and how the European Union framework is really paying attention to those. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will be here to answer any questions and comments you might have.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this very nice presentation. A lot of food for thought, a lot of very, very interesting take on these important issues. As you said, these are in many ways under attack or scrutiny. There are question marks in many senses about the work on anti-discrimination and inequalities. So this are very, very interesting and most important issues that we need to address and talk about, and so on. So thank you very much for this nice talk. And I would like to open up the floor for any questions or comments to Laura or the rest of the audience. Are there anybody that wants to start up at this time? Any have any thoughts or questions?
I can have a question, Gunnar.
Yeah, please, Celia. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much, Laura, for this great presentation. Very useful, very important, and even though you have no answers, very, very interesting. So I have many questions. I try to ask you very not too long questions. Okay. So first, you spoke about measuring equality in opportunities, and I would like to know how you measure. Do you have any examples of how to measure equal access to the labor market, the working conditions, the equal enjoyment of rights that you talked about?
Thank you very much, Celia, for your question. Yes, I was talking before, maybe, well, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. I was talking about measures and how to design specific policies to promote equality of opportunities. But I would take your answer to, at the same time, talk a little bit more about what you asked. And yes, we have a lot of reports. We have specific agencies that try to study and develop statistics, regular statistics, to try to measure the quality of working conditions. Just now I was reading about a report specifically designed from a European perspective, which was implemented within the member states. And they focused on studying the perception of workers when trying to access labor market, when trying to promote, what conditions would they prefer, if they were happy and satisfied with the conditions they had. So I think right now is a great moment because we have different reports from different perspectives. We have global, regional, and national people adopting statistical initiatives that try to find the best way to measure equality of opportunities. I don't think we have one way or one best way to do so, but I do believe that they are focusing on that lately. And when I said what I referred to was precisely on how to define measures of equality of opportunities and examples that we already have. In Spain, for example, we have a national regulation forces companies that have more than 50 workers. They all have to have a equality plan. They have to make a diagnosis of the company's situation, how many women and men are working on the different positions, what their salaries are, how many cases of harassment, of sexual harassment have been taking place within the company, and a lot of measures that have been specifically designed from a gender equality perspective, and that now companies are obliged to implement within their organizations. So this could be an example of measures of focused on equality of opportunities, because precisely the companies are the ones that have to do it in a way that it really reflects how the situation is within the company. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add, maybe someone else has a question. Don't hesitate to raise your hands. I wanted to add that your work is very interesting and might be interesting to link it with another research that I'm aware of. Last Friday, I was in the European Council. There was a conference on the difference in patrimonies, how men tend to have 30% more patrimonies in value in their patrimonies than women, for many, many reasons, because they make a better salary, of course, but also because they tend to inherit more. For example, when you have a business company, usually you will give it to your son, not to your daughter. And that could be interesting also to link those two subjects. Does anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I have one last question. No? So I have
Go ahead, Celia. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kenner. So unless I'm mistaken, you did not talk about, well, not in depth, of positive discrimination. And I wanted to know what you think. What do you think of positive discrimination? Does it work? Because I'm very perplexed about that concept. I think it does work somehow, but also when I take the example of Canada, where now there are so many positive discrimination rules, if you're a woman, if you're a native, if you're a minority, that now if you're a middle-aged white man, you cannot get a job. So I have some interrogations on positive discrimination, and I wanted to know, well, what do you think?
Yes, that's a very interesting topic, and it's yes. And the times we are right now, everyone is contesting all of these categories that historically have been placed there for a reason. Yes, I first wanted to say that precisely pay discrimination, since we were talking about the economic inequalities and sex inequalities, that pay discrimination has plays a very important role there as well. And that in general, but also considering its structural and systemic nature, which is what you were talking about before, that maybe men usually inherit more than the women. All of these social norms is precisely what constitute this structural or systemic dimension. And so that is everywhere, and that is also one of the biggest challenges we have right now. And regarding positive action, yes, okay. Usually, I find it more confusing when people refer to it as positive discrimination, because as I said before, discrimination requires to have this power imbalance, power asymmetry. So if we are talking about positive discrimination, this really doesn't really make sense, because it would mean that we are discriminating against the dominant group. So conceptually, that wouldn't really make a lot of sense. But the other important issue I wanted to say is that the positive action is inherently temporal and focused, and it has a compensating objective. And so I would say that in some places, in some countries, all of these positive actions have been adopted. Maybe it is because they have a historic background that has, for a very long time, justified and established an asymmetric society, which means that there are certain groups that do not have, by far, the same opportunities to access the labor market. So I do understand these concerns, because when you see it from an external perspective and you see that we have all of these quotas and all of these specific measures, it might be frightening, like, okay, and then what else? But I would advise to keep in mind that the nature of these measures is temporal, and it's to compensate past inequalities, and that we are all working towards the same objective, is to achieve a substantive equality. And then in the labor market, we have many other circumstances and principles that also work. And this positive action is not just because you are a Black woman, doesn't mean that per se you're going, no, we have other guarantees as well, and they are compatible with this need to compensate past inequalities. So yeah, we can talk about this in another time, because this gives for a whole presentation about positive action.
Right. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura, and thank you all the participants. The time is running out. These are very important questions, issues. We can't solve them in a quick way. If we saw in the beginning of your presentation that there's, sorry to say, the development hasn't been that rapid that we would like to. So I think that we still need to work and address and try to make more and better measures, both when it comes to law and regulations and how to measure the change, the transition going on, but also change in mindset and culture and a lot of things that we need to do. And we have a task ahead of us of working on that jointly. But I would like to conclude the saying that this is, as I understand, of great interest to many within the Alliance. So I'm positive and certain that the dialogue and discussion, learning from each other, will continue, and we will continue working on the topic jointly within the partner universities and among those that are interested on this important issue. This was the first talk for the spring. We will continue with the talks further on. The next talk is planned to February 17th, but we need to come up with or need to the talker isn't. We still have dialogue on some parts, so we need to come back with who's presenting at that time. And we will have talks in March, April, May, and June as well. And they will all be advertised through the channels of the officers and the internal newsletter and so on, and through the web page. So I hope that I will see you all in the next upcoming talks for the spring. And thank you very much for your participation and this interesting presentation once again by Laura. Thank you, and see you again soon, I hope.